The topic being discussed is what is the impact of fossil fuel subsidies on Americans? Hello, I'm Jack Walker.
I'm Isabella Massioli.
I'm Amari Dennis McCormick.
Tatiana Tejada.
And I'm Rafael Segarra.
A little bit of background on fossil fuel subsidies. A fossil fuel subsidy is defined as any government action that lowers the cost of fossil fuel energy production, raises the price received by energy producers, or lowers the price paid by energy consumers. In short, fossil fuel subsidies are simply tax breaks given to big oil companies. This graph shows how subsidies have allowed for steady prices in gas for the United States. The United States gas price, being in green, has stayed relatively consistent throughout the years. However, countries such as Australia, in red, who do not provide the level of subsidies America does, the amount of subsidies that America does, prices are ever changing.
With the way fossil fuels function, the runoff from production coupled with the emission collects and pollutes the ocean, as shown in the graph in the top left. Emission from factories, gas-based vehicles, and waste ultimately collects into our ocean. CO2 emissions cause ocean acidification, unstoppable diseases, and ocean dead zones, as told by Jeremy B.C. This means that with the constant rise in fossil fuel emissions comes the tainting of our Earth's oceans, which undoubtedly brings detrimental effects. Mass extinction of cellular life means that there will be a lack of evolutionary adaptation, which will lead to extinction. Deforestation is the act of removing trees or land masses for personal gain, in which places new suburban landscapes for people to reside on, or even more fossil fuel extraction. Doing this alone constitutes to about 1/5 of the annual emissions of fossil fuels worldwide. The image on the bottom right portrays the blatant difference between terrain that has been decimated and terrain to soon be met with the same fate.
Exposure to particulate matter causes a mess of negative health impacts. According to the Health and Environmental Alliance, pollution kills about 6 million people each year, and fossil fuels are one of the top contributors to deadly pollution. Fossil fuel subsidies essentially work as a negative carbon price. This means that the value of developing fossil fuels is reduced, so not only are the real costs being passed on to citizens via health and climate impacts, but the fuel industry is being paid for this so-called privilege. Additionally, air pollutants from fossil fuels also contribute to the event of lung and other cancers. And according to the Environmental and Energy Study Institute, canceroma accounts for 30% of cancer-related deaths annually. Large leaks from natural gas infrastructure are one of the main reasons for severe health issues on Americans. The air pollution caused by the smog hanging over cities to smoke inside the homes has caused a major increase in the amount of premature death throughout years, and the combined effects of outside and household pollutions cause about 7 million premature deaths each year, and this is largely as a result of increased mortality from stroke, heart condition, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, lung cancer, and other acute respiratory diseases. Now, looking at the chart, at the impact of particulate pollution from fossil fuel power plants on the U.S. health, it's shown that upper respiratory ills, lower respiratory ills, and asthma attacks have the major number of cases per year. So natural gas leaks are a significant source of methane emissions, which raise a major safety concern. And oil spills are perhaps the best known fossil fuel-related environmental dangers that lead to an increase in the health issues of American citizens.
Fossil fuels are the primary source of energy in the world today, but people started using fossil fuels long before the first steam engine running on coal. Ancient civilizations did not have the technology to either drill or refine oil, but they used the petroleum that they found seeping on the surface for construction and waterproofing. To the left, there's a chart placed showing some petroleum, coal, and natural gases that were used thousands of years ago today by various civilizations on various continents. The history of the use of fossil fuel is as old as the history of civilization. Of course, early use of fossil fuel cannot compare in the volume for today's exploration, processing, trading industries in the three main fossil fuels: crude oil, natural oil, gas, and coal. Those three fossil fuels combined account for the majority of the global energy used now. In ancient times, the use of fossil fuel may have been limited due to lack of knowledge and technology, but civilization tried and to some extent managed to make the most of the fossil fuel resources they could extract in their everyday lives. While the energy history of the United States is one of the significant changes, three fossil fuel sources, petroleum, natural gas, coal, have made up at least majority of the total U.S. energy consumption for more than 100 years. By 1961, coal had become the major fuel used to generate electricity of the United States. All fossil fuels were organic materials once, but different geologic conditions, such as pressure, temperature, rocks, and sediment, have led to the formation of different types of fossil fuels.
The future and its innovations will be dictated by our choices today. As Elon Musk once said, we are going to exit the fossil fuel era. It is inevitable. As people become more aware of the consequences fossil fuels endow onto our health and the environment, ethical reasonings are appealing that people to move their energy consumptions away from fossil fuels and into alternative that promises better results. As alternative energy options develop in the United States, fossil fuel companies will have less leverage and the government will have less reliance on fossil fuels. A decrease in the reliance of the fossil fuel industry means governments will be less incited to subsidize them in their tax base. This will further move the markets towards alternative energies in the future. In an executive order from California's Governor Gavin Newsom's cabinet, published September 23, 2020, it stated, "Executive order directs the state to require that by 2035, all new cars and passenger trucks sold in California be zero-emission vehicles." The order also directs the state to make more action to tackle the dirtiest oil extraction and support workers and job retention, as well as creating ways to transcend away from fossil fuels. In an article by Pew Research Center by Jude Silver, it states, over the past decade, solar power has experienced the largest percentage growth of any U.S. energy source. Solar generated just above 2 million kilowatts hours of electricity in 2008. A decade later, it generated more than 93 billion kilowatts hours, an almost 46% increase, and the graph shown represents that.
The United States government's budget in regard to fossil fuel subsidies has risen over the years, currently at $20 billion. This ever-increasing monetary support leads to one of two things: Americans being taxed more or money being taken out of other vital government programs. Both is taking place, and this is evident as current budgeting in 2020 had 10 times more money dedicated to fossil fuel subsidies than education. This graph shows how since 1937, taxes have increased drastically. With Medicare, Social Security, and income taxes, the average American is paying over 15% in taxes compared to less than 4% in 1937. This graph depicts the profit the major fossil fuel companies of BP, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, and Shell acquired in 2011 in relation to their money spent on assets. In receiving subsidies, their profits only grow. To help further their profits, they advertise as job creators. However, these 5 companies alone have generated $546 billion in profits between 2005 and 2010 and reduced their U.S. workforce by 11,200 employees over that period. These big oil companies are taking Americans' money in the form of subsidies and taking their promised jobs as well.
The two solutions being presented today is either to stop funding gas stations or convert solely to renewable energy. However, stop funding the gas stations. This option is very unlikely, as there are millions on top of millions of cars which rely on gas, which there are no real alternative for. Mobility and practicality will simply plummet. However, converting to renewable energy is up and coming form of energy that utilizes alternative sources and fuels to compensate for the blatant issues that stem from fossil fuels. The reason why this energy is preferred over fossil fuels is due to the health benefits that come from it. They don't necessarily cause lung cancer and do not lead to catastrophic natural disasters. The implementation for this energy is also already in place, so the installment isn't too time efficient. The only issue that may come from this process is the creation as a whole. Nuclear energy comes from the same plants that create nuclear arsenals, which have been known for skin cancer and mental disability, while other sources rely on completely natural occurrences, which are completely random and often unpredictable. Thank you. Are there any questions for today?
Yeah, I have a question for each one of you. Tatiana, we're going to start with you. Describe how the content of the team presentation changed as a result of your group discussions.
Can you repeat that again, Mr. Beard? It cut out.
Yeah. Describe how the content of the team presentation changed as a result of you guys talking.
It changed over, so we had in the beginning multiple ideas. In a sense, everybody had their own topic. So when it came down to the final decision for what we were doing, we had to figure out whose lenses and things matched up better. And then when it came to figuring out the end result, it was more or less we combined all of the lenses and then found one.
All right, thank you. Jack, you're up next. Reflecting on the work of the other people in your group, who's had the biggest impact on your understanding of all of this?
Yeah, of course. So Amari's environmental lens definitely allowed me to further understand the fossil fuel subsidy kind of idea as a whole. It's an extremely dense and, expansive project that's going on with fossil fuels. There's a lot going on with non-renewables as well. And as we kind of dove into Amari's, environmental section, it allowed me to realize past global climate change, the other effects that fossil fuel subsidies are having. And when I thought of fossil fuels, I always just thought of global climate change. So he allowed me to kind of open my eyes to the other negative effects of fossil fuel subsidies.
All right, cool. Thank you. Amari, you're up next. In what way did you improve your ability to work with the group as a result of this project?
Of course. So when it came down to my ability to work with the group, I really realized I had to tie in deeply with Isabella's lens when it came down to health and understanding how I often ask myself, how does environmental tie into health? How does environmental promote the quality of life for humans abroad? When I read over Issa's IRR, I came to understand that when it came to fossil fuel subsidies, the emissions that were released overall hurt the respiratory system within the human lungs, which helped me understand that it's these emissions, it's these fossil fuel subsidies that are being released that cause detriments to the human physique. Hence why it helped me understand and helped me progress further into the presentation.
All right, thank you. Isabella, you're up next. What was the strongest counter argument to your solution that your team identified?
I would say the strongest counter argument would be the whole implementation of reliability of renewable energy, because the points that we made were just very strong and come to prove that it's not as easy to transfer into that whole new renewable energy idea with all of the interests and everything else that's put into fossil fuels.
All right, Raphael said the best for last. Describe an argument from one of your peers' reports that you didn't use, and why didn't you use it?
So we decided to not use, at the beginning, Amari had a point in how an environment and fossil fuels directly impacted the global warming, but we decided to not include that in our presentation because we thought it was too broad of a topic, and we decided to put points in which we could directly tie the function of fossil fuels and the effect on the environment. Instead of that, it could also cause oceanic acidification, which is not really a point that we're going towards. So overall, in his aspect in environment, we decided to exclude that and go forward with our presentation and focus on the American people.